Welcome to Facing the Canon. My guest on the programme is Jenni Calcraft, a very inspirational mother who works with children and their families in a hospital. Jenni, welcome to Facing the Canon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege.
I was in the car with Killy driving up north, and you came on the radio and you told your story.
Yeah.
And I said to Killy, we've got to have you on the programme.
Yeah.
You grew up in Nepal. What was that like?
Oh, it was a wonderful experience. So I was in Nepal because my dad is a doctor and he was working with Tear Fund. So I spent the first half of my childhood there, and then we were back in the UK after that.
But that must have been an experience.
Yes, it was. It was a great place to grow up. We climbed the Himalayas and we rode on elephants on the Terai. But it's also really where my parents introduced me to the foundations of my faith and demonstrated showing God's love to the people around us, just with whatever skill set we have. Yeah, it was a special place to grow up.
Now, would you say you've always been a Christian, or was there a time when it kind of crystallized for you?
I would say that I've had the absolute blessing and privilege of growing up in a Christian household. It became a faith of my own probably in my teenage years. That's when I committed my own life to Jesus. But I think really it's then as we come through into adulthood and start really living life that our faith needs to solidify, doesn't it? And it stops becoming the faith of our parents and the faith of our own through the experiences of life, including the challenging and difficult ones. I think it's then really that our faith is really refined, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I agree with what you said there. It's so true. You know, of course, we want to raise our children knowing Christ, but it's like we're giving them the bricks.
Yes.
And there comes a time when they have to say, yes, I want to cement them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's at that point that the head knowledge that we've been provided really has to become heart knowledge, doesn't it? Is when we go through those experiences ourselves and have to rely on our own faith and our own relationship with God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you trained as a physiotherapist.
Yep, I'm a physiotherapist, by profession.
And in what areas did you work in when you did that?
Well, I started on the wards in the hospitals doing the rotations when I first qualified back in 2006. And I did that for a number of years, and then took a back step in terms of my career and worked weekends and evenings so that I could be homeward focused with the kids. But then actually, to be honest, life took a little bit of a turn away from my career as a result of what happened in our own personal family life. And I had to step away completely from my career for a while, and I'm just starting to get back into that now. Yeah.
So you got married, you had a son called Matthew.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
And the birth was fine.
Yeah.
But after the birth, you discovered that there was some health concerns.
Issues.
So tell us that story.
Sure. Yeah. So we've got 3 children. He's our youngest. He's, like you said, he's called Matthew, which means gift from God. And he really is a gift. He's a gift in every sense. And we're very thankful that he completed our family. But actually what we learned about God has been just as much of a gift, because like you say, when he was born, we initially thought everything was fine. It wasn't so fine. The first thing that happened was he was diagnosed with a condition called craniosynostosis, which means that his skull had fused prematurely. So at 16 weeks old, he went through major surgery. He had skull reconstruction. And for most children with that condition, that's the end of the story. They're just monitored through childhood. But for Matthew, that wasn't the case. And as he grew and developed, it just became apparent that there were more issues and more problems going on. The most significant of which is when he was 2, he became nil by mouth and tube fed due to an unsafe swallow, which had a real significant impact on us as a family. But the challenge with Matthew is that we've never received a diagnosis. They've never pinpointed down, they've never worked out exactly what the issue is overarching. Instead, we've just got a long list of challenges and problems, which has been a really difficult journey, to be honest.
So he's been examined by all sorts of doctors.
Yeah, he's been under 24 different departments at Alder Hey Children's Hospital, and we've averaged 40 to 50 hospital appointments a year across those departments. So I'm pleased to say he's doing very well. He's 8,
doing very well
and he's
now.
thriving. He's great. He's doing really, really well. But it's been a tough journey. It was a real curveball to have your third child and expecting them to be perfectly well and healthy, and to suddenly be in that situation that involves healthcare professionals, hospital waiting rooms, surgeries, investigations. It's been tough.
And you're talking about a hospital that's one of the leading children's hospitals in the country. And with all the knowledge that these doctors and consultants they still were unable to diagnose what exactly is the issue.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. And I think that's actually the story for quite a lot of children. Matthew's not unique, but it does make it harder to manage, because who takes the lead? Which department oversees their care? When they've got problems that are in pretty much every single body system, but no diagnosis, who manages that situation? It's not easy, and he's not unique. There's a lot of children and a lot of families living that reality. Yeah.
How did you, as a mum, cope? Because obviously you're looking after Matthew, but you've still got 2 other children.
Yeah.
It was interesting. There's a quote that's just come to my head. It was the mother of John Wesley, and she was asked, which of your many children do you love the most? And she said, I love the one that's most sick. No, of course you still love your other children, but there is I've got to take care of this sick child. But so how did you manage both emotionally, physically, during this time?
Yeah. I think it's a time that we really called on our faith, and our faith was really deepened. And that's the thing that's been a real gift from God. I think practically, we don't have any family nearby us in Liverpool. We've got a wonderful family, but they're not local. And it's been the church, it's been our local church that has really supported us through that. It's been the friendships and the support network there. And everyone has walked that story with us. It's a Freedom Church story. It's not just a story of the Calcraft family, and it's not just Matthew's story. And can say hand on heart that the church has really gotten us through everything that we've been through in a really beautiful way, and we're really grateful for that.
It is so good, honestly, to hear that, because so often, we're knocking the church, or the church doesn't do this, but it's so lovely to hear that you're saying your local church assisted, served, supported, and helped you.
Absolutely. They've been our family through it, and that's what church should be, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is family, and they've prayed a lot for Matthew, and we do really consider his well-being to be as a result of all that prayer, in really wonderful ways.
But you said a moment ago, you kind of leaned in with God. So did you struggle a little bit, God, why?
Oh, absolutely. I think early on, one of the things that my husband and I both realised is that we were praising God because he was God, but we were no longer praising him because he was good.
Yes.
And I must say, we did lose sight of God's goodness. And that's one of those things that had been head knowledge for me. I'd grown up knowing, being told and learning, and knowing full well in my head that God is good and all the reasons why we know that and believe that. But actually, when that situation arose, we did lose sight of his goodness. Nothing about the situation felt good. And there was a lot of, why is this happening as you go from one crisis to another? Quite often with young children, they're a bit more vulnerable as well if they're not well. So it was literally one crisis would end, and then the next one would start. So we did lose sight of God's goodness. But actually, have you heard that phrase about how God writes the truth on our hearts? And it's only when our hearts are broken that the truth falls inside. And having had our hearts broken by what was happening with Matthew, I can now say 100% that I know that God is good in all circumstances. And I wouldn't have learnt that had we not gone through what we went through with Matthew. Head knowledge can only take you so far, and I'm actually really grateful for the opportunity to learn that through the circumstances. I'd give the circumstances back in an instant, but I wouldn't give back what we've learned about God, to be honest. So
looking back and of course, looking forward.
Yeah.
We sometimes use the expression, Jenny, the sovereignty of God,
Yeah.
and which basically means, look, God is in control. You can testify that despite it being hard,
Yeah.
God was still sovereign.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that we really learnt through Matthew is to live life with a heavenly perspective. Because we had no diagnosis for Matthew, we had literally years of not knowing which direction this was going to go. Was Matthew going to improve and was he going to thrive? Or was he going to be diagnosed with one of the life-limiting and degenerative conditions that all the different departments wanted to test him for? You know, where were we going with this? What was the story going to be? And the only way that we really managed to live with that uncertainty and with that unknown was by living from a heavenly perspective. And by that I mean that God is eternal, and even death has no sting, does it? So when you don't know what the outcome is going to be with your own child, and you live in that kind of waiting and uncertainty for literally years, you have to live with that certainty of heaven and the eternal. And when you do that, it's a lot less scary. Viewing that situation from an earthly perspective, it's just bleak and there's no hope. But when you view it from a heavenly perspective, even the worst case scenario is that your son is going to go home to his heavenly Father.
Yes.
And although that's a hard reality to face, at the same time, that reality without God is even harder.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
It is.
Isn't it?
It is.
And so, again, that's another thing that we learned through parenting Matthew, is to have that heavenly perspective in all aspects of life.
So for any parents now who are listening to our conversation, Jenny, who are struggling with children that are poorly, that's what you'd say to them.
Yeah, and I think to live with a heavenly perspective, and also the other thing that I learned was about how we steward our children rather, as parents. I remember one time when Matthew was about 2, I went for coffee with a friend and her 6-week-old baby. And at the time we were waiting for investigation results for all sorts of horrible things for Matthew. And we went for coffee and Matthew wanted to hold the baby. So we sat Matthew down and we put this tiny 6-week-old baby in his lap. And it was fine for about a minute. And then the baby started fussing and needed fed and needed to go back to his mum. And Matthew decided in that moment that he didn't want to give the baby back. And he kind of hung on really tightly, and it was for about 30 seconds, it was quite hairy, to be honest, because we're trying to get this very fragile 6-week-old baby out of the tantruming arms of my 2-year-old who didn't want to let go. And actually afterwards, when I reflected on it, it taught me a lot about how we need to view our own children. And actually, we as the adults in that situation knew that Matthew couldn't give the baby what he needed, and the baby would always ultimately have to go back to his mum to get what he needed. She was the only one who could provide that. And actually it was a gift and a privilege for Matthew to hold the baby for a short period of time. But in Matthew's eyes, he was going to hang on and hold on to the baby forever.
Yes.
And it just really taught me that actually I want to parent my children in that way, on an open hand, acknowledging that they belong to God, that he's the one who can provide everything that they need, and to not kind of hang on to them tight like Matthew was holding on to that baby, but just to be willing to hand over control to God, and to be willing to give all good things in my life back to God, and to acknowledge that they are gifts from him.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's probably what I would say to parents who are living that really difficult reality. Steward your children, knowing that they ultimately are God's children and they're in his hands, and he will provide what they need.
That is such a beautiful picture.
Mm.
You met with a number of other mums, or you were at the hospital, you went to get a coffee, or a group of mums, and then one mum asks all the other mums if any of them can recommend a fortune teller to help her discover what the future is for her child. And tell us what happened in that situation.
Sure. So it was during an admission. Matthew had been admitted to the ward, and in the bay, like you say, one of the mums just looked up from her phone and she said, does anybody have the details for a fortune teller? Now it's not that uncommon in Liverpool. Liverpool's actually quite a spiritual city, but people would tend to turn to fortune tellers, spiritualists and mediums in situations when they're looking for answers. And so all the other mums got their phones out as well, and they all started swapping numbers of fortune tellers and spiritualists.
Were you like shocked and surprised?
I was a little surprised, but then at the same time, because I know Liverpool, not surprised at the same time. And actually it kind of hit me quite hard in the heart. I found it because as a Christian and having a faith and having that relationship with God, I knew that what they were looking for in a fortune teller, they weren't going to find the answers there. And I remember just sitting with Matthew on my lap and just praying in that moment, you know, God, wouldn't it be amazing if we could bring you and your love and your answers to prayer into these situations in hospitals like Alderhay and into the situations here that are in this room that I know about. But as a physiotherapist, I then dismissed that prayer pretty instantly. My next thought was, well, that's never going to happen, if I'm honest. Because having worked as a clinician on a ward in a hospital setting, I know that actually mixing faith and clinical isn't easy. The saviour in a hospital is the medicine and the medical staff and the science. And as a physiotherapist, it's really hard to share your faith in a clinical setting. It's considered to be crossing a professional boundary. And I do have friends who do it incredibly well and are very good at sharing their faith in those settings, but it's not easy. So if I'm honest, I thought, yeah, wouldn't it be amazing to share God in hospitals? And my next thought was, well, that's not going to happen.
But the reality is,
it has happened.
That little prayer,
tiny little mustard seed of
was
faith,
probably the seed, the mustard seed that birthed someone cares.
Absolutely.
So you then went to speak to your church leaders.
Yeah, I did. Yep.
And said, look, there's opportunity. I don't know how we're going to meet this need. So tell us what steps followed.
Sure. So a few weeks later at our church in the Sunday morning service, the leaders said that they would like to start more social action projects. If anybody had any suggestions or ideas, then speak to them. And then this prayer popped back into my head, didn't it? So I spoke to them, spoke to the chaplains at Alderhay when I was next in with Matthew, you know, just popped along to the office and said, you know, what do you think? And those initial conversations is what led to Someone Cares. And God took my tiny little mustard seed of faith and turned it into something really beautiful and really wonderful.
And how long ago was that, Jenny?
That was 2018.
2018.
Yeah.
And what's happened under the banner of Someone Cares since then?
Yeah, sure. So we started as a church supporting the chaplains and the spiritual care team by initially providing practical provision. We put together toiletry care packs and donated children's pyjamas, which were given out in A&E, and we put information in those packs about spiritual care. So it formed a kind of point of contact between families and the chaplains at that point of admission.
So this is a hospital that caters for how many children?
They've got over 300 inpatient beds.
Right.
Yeah.
So you started putting these resources together.
Yeah, and that was the first step. But then,
and they were welcomed.
Yeah, very welcomed.
Because no one else was doing that.
No, they were very welcomed and very well received by staff and by families as well.
And all sorts of people were involved. I gather there was one older lady that was ironing the...
yeah, she still is. Yeah.
Ironing the pyjamas.
Yeah, she irons and packages all the sets of pyjamas, and then we take them into Alderhay. And our midweek community life groups at church have packing parties and put together the toiletry packs. There's a graphic designer in our church who created the flyers. So there's many ways that people have gotten involved with that side of things.
And it is interesting, isn't it, that families will rush to the hospital in a crisis, accident and emergency, and they won't take everything they need.
No.
So to actually be offered it, it is a great thing.
Yeah, hospital is a really isolating place. It's a scary place to end up in, and so it's just nice to be able to give somebody like just that practical gift of love when they really need it. And then soon after, we then started providing volunteers as well from our church congregation. We now have a team of 5 volunteers who go in on a weekly basis and bolster the number of volunteers that the chaplains already had. And we have conversations on the wards with families. We offer family support. And, you know, I still find it absolutely mind-blowing that Having spent years on wards as a physiotherapist and feeling unable to share my faith, we now have swipe access onto the wards of the hospital. We speak to the nurses, we're pointed in the direction of families, we go and speak to families, have conversations. And then as part of that, if prayer is something that they would like, we then get to pray into their situation as well. And I would say that 9 times out of 10, if you say, would you like us to pray? The answer is yes. I'd really like you to pray for this situation. And I just find that an incredible privilege, and quite, in some senses, still quite unbelievable that we have the opportunity to do that. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
Yeah.
And when you know, of course there are chaplains, but you said there are 300 beds. Did you say that? And really, they don't have the time to sit with everyone at 300 beds. And so you are able to come alongside what's already happening.
Yes, absolutely.
But actually give a bit more time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Express more compassion, help people who are struggling in their journey of faith.
Yeah.
Are there any stories that you're able to tell us that have encouraged you?
Yeah, I can't share specific individual stories, but what I can say is that we've got lots of families who have come into Alderhay in really horrendous, scary, tragic situations, and we've been able to support them emotionally. And the first thing to say is it's not an evangelistic ministry and it's not a healing ministry. It's a ministry of getting alongside and showing God's love, and we show that to people of all faith and those who have no faith. But there are families who have requested prayer. We've then seen those prayers answered, and we've actually had them tell us that at the worst time in their lives, they've come to know God and know Jesus for the very first time, and they've experienced a God who loves them, who answers their prayers, and who's given them peace and hope in the darkest situations of their lives.
It is incredible. I just remembered my friend, this family in America, and Dana and David Curtis, and Dana gave birth to a son that was 1 pound 6 ounces.
Wow.
And Killy and I flew over and we went to intensive care, and he was in an incubator, and just putting my hands in the incubator and just holding this beautiful creation of God, and just praying in silence, over that baby. Well, he's 13 today.
Oh, amazing.
I know. It just does something to you, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, there are over 1,000 hospitals in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
And hundreds of thousands of hospitals around the world. Probably millions around the world. And it's wonderful how you, a mother of a child that's got health issues, was prompted because of a conversation that you overheard, and then your church steps up. So it actually doesn't take a lot.
No, it doesn't. God has been so good and so faithful and so gracious in this situation. And it's just incredible, and it's such a testament of the fact that God can bring good out of all circumstances. And we're really just blown away by what God has done with our story with Matthew. It's yet another gift from God that's come from him and his life. Yeah.
What would you say to any churches, church leaders that might be listening now, and maybe there is a hospital, a stone's throw away, or it's in their community, or it's in their parish? What advice would you give to them based on what you've experienced?
Sure. So Someone Cares, because we've seen it work so well at Alderhay, we actually last year applied to the Cinnamon Network Incubator Programme. And I'm excited to say that we won that programme, which now gives us 2 years of support to grow and replicate Someone Cares. And that's the stage that we're at, and that's what we're starting to do. So if you're a church leader or just an individual within a church who feels touched by this story, and you would like to see something within your own local hospital, then I would say get in touch with us, because we would love to help replicate what we're doing in Alder Hey, to see other churches running the same project into their own local hospitals. I think the link between a local church and a hospital chaplaincy team is a really special one. Hospital chaplaincy teams are doing wonderful work already. They already often have volunteers, but this concept of linking a church with a hospital chaplaincy team is actually a little bit different, and it's worked incredibly well. Even just in terms of offering prayer. As a church, the whole church gets behind offering prayer for the hospital, the patients, the spiritual care team, but also individual stories within the hospital as well. We pour church-wide support and prayer into family situations if they request it, and that's been wonderful. So yeah, so if you're interested and you like the sound of what we're doing and feel inspired by it, then get in touch. Yeah.
And one of the things you've encouraged me, Jenny, because we've provided you with a few of our resources.
You have, yes.
And whenever you've written back to us to tell us, even recently, you said that you were able to offer our Easter storybook to children, and they and their families gratefully received them.
Yeah, they were gratefully received, but also even more special than that, they then led to conversations and really meaningful interactions with people, and also the opportunity to pray into situations, which we then saw answers to prayer for. So yeah, they were an amazing resource, and they're very well received. Yeah.
Well, it's very encouraging. And you mentioned that your son Matthew is doing well.
Yeah, he's doing really well. Yeah, still ongoing issues, but he's thriving and loving life. So yeah, he's doing much better.
Well, Jenny, well done for stepping up and stepping out. And it's wonderful that so many children who are poorly, so many families are being touched with the compassion and the love of God. And you're expressing it and demonstrating it. We'll keep doing it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Facing the Canon.
Thank you.
I do hope that's encouraged you, inspired you. You know, what one mum can do when she steps out and says, well, look, let's see what we can do with what we have. And that is a challenge to all of us. What can we all do with what we have in our local communities? And maybe you're encouraged to think, maybe we could reach out to our local hospital. Well, thank you very much for joining us on Facing the Canon. Please join us again.
Just say yes to serving.
A surge of courage and compassion.
I felt it was the voice of God.
Back in the early days, I think the
was saying, my son died for you.
Worship is speaking out truth.
It's freeing, isn't it?
The J.John podcast. Listen on all major platforms.